This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, everybody, good, thank you, welcome. And we'll be continuing where we left off last week, right? This is three general parts. One of them is the history of it, which we started last week, we'll be continuing this week, followed by the causes that anti-Semitism is normally attributed to, and then we will come to, from a Jewish Torah perspective, how do we understand it, and what could be done to hopefully remedy it along the way. Okay, so continue over here with our notes on the handout that those who want me to email them to, I've emailed them. If anybody would like to be added to that list, just let me know. Otherwise, we post it over here. Islamic anti-Semitism. Okay. So very similar to Jesus before him, Muhammad, who was the self-proclaimed prophet and the founder of Islam, he wanted recognition by the Jews, right? No other group could validate his religious claims like the Jews. Since Islam claims that the Quran supersedes Christianity, the New Testament, the Torah of the Jews, it's the new upgraded level of spirituality. So therefore, he certainly wanted the Jews to be on board. And initially, he incorporated lots of Jewish law into his system, right? Originally, they were praying towards Jerusalem, and then it was changed to Mecca. Yom Kippur, and then it was changed to Ramadan. Monotheism, right? There's absolutely no issue of a Jew walking into a mosque. It is pure monotheism. And dietary restrictions, halal, right? It was modeled after Judaism. However, the Jews rejected his new religion. And therefore, he turned against the Jews, fighting them in battle and cursing them in his writings. Okay, and this has certainly continued throughout the centuries, right? 1948, the founding of the State of Israel. So I would say at that point already, Islam has led the world in its anti-Semitic rhetoric, writings, actions, right? It's often disguised, no, it's only anti-Zionism, but we'll see how dishonest that is. And certainly what happened across the world. So they weren't chasing in Los Angeles and in New York and Chicago. They weren't chasing down Zionists. They were chasing down Jews. And when they went through the neighborhoods in in England, announcing over a loudspeaker, we're going to kill the Jews and rape their daughters, it wasn't the Zionists that they were speaking about, it was the Jews. So this whole anti-Zionism is a facade. It's a farce, and it is a facade. Let's go to source number 1 of this section of section 4, historian of Jewish life in the Arab world. It is only natural that Muhammad prophetic claims could not tolerate as a neighbor a large monotheistic community which categorically denied his claims as a prophet and probably also ridiculed his inevitable blunders, right? If I'm coming out with 2.0, then people should gravitate, should grab hold of that and not insist on their 1.0. If they're insisting on their 1.0, it shows maybe my 2.0 is not an improvement, it's not a step forward, but actually it's just a diversion. Quotes from the Quran, and this is very interesting. Let me take the quote first, and then we'll, on account of their breaking their covenant, we cursed them and made their hearts hard. But Allah has cursed them on account of their unbelief, so they do not believe but a little. Again, the Quran, number 3, Ibrahim was not a Jew nor a Christian. He was an upright man, a Muslim, even though there was no Islam at that point. And he was not one of the polytheists. Do you say that Abraham and Ismail and Yaakov and the tribes were Jews or Christians? Are you better knowing or Allah? Right? So that's the whole undermining of all Judaism and Christianity, right? To just deny it all. From the Quran, source number 4, right? And this was used by Anwar Sadat in 1972 in lecturing his soldiers about the importance to rid the Arabian Peninsula of Jews. And humiliation and wretchedness were stamped upon them, and they were visited with wrath from Allah because they disbelieved in Allah's revelations and slew the prophets wrongfully. That was for their disobedience and transgression. Now, there is also many quotes in the Quran which are pro-Jewish and pro the Jews returning to the land of Israel. And there is a major debate in the Islamic religious, intellectual, academic world, which approach is genuine, which approach is the correct approach. And we see the split between the radical Islam, who take all of these quotes and other quotes from what's there, they're similar to our medrash, and hiding behind the tree, and the trees will say, here's the Jew, right? And the other schools of thought, which are promoted more by the more of the Sunni states, though there are amongst both, and certainly amongst those Arab countries that have joined the Abraham Accords, who look to coexist and recognize the Jews' place in the land of Israel, and that we can coexist. Right? They haven't always felt that way. There's all recent developments, and certainly I think it's the realization that the dream of driving all the Jews or Zionists, we'll soon see about that, into the sea has not succeeded so well, and instead they've remained they've remained backward as opposed to moving forward in the world. But we certainly do see these different approaches playing out in the world policies and politics today. What was it like for the Jews living in these Muslim countries? So on one hand, the Jews often rose to prominence in these countries and had very high positions. And for the most part, we were not being slaughtered. There was the Farhud in Iraq, but for the most part, we were not being slaughtered like the pogroms of our Christian neighbors. But nevertheless, it was if they want to say how wonderful it was for the Jews, that's also not a correct description of the events. Number 5, Salo W. Barron's Social Religious History, 11th century. Each Jew had to have a stamp of lead hanging from his neck on which the word Dhimmi, non-Muslim, was inscribed. Right? In Saudi Arabia, I believe this was the case during the Gulf Wars. I don't know if it's changed. There are certain roads for Muslims and only Muslims, and other roads for non-Muslims. On women, he likewise imposed 2 distinguishing marks. The shoes worn by each woman had to be one red and one black, obviously turning them into objects of ridicule. Also had to carry on her neck or attached to her shoe a small brass bell, announcing her religion to everyone. And the Gentiles used to ridicule Jews, the mob and children often assaulting Jews in all the streets of Baghdad. Number 6, Edward Lane, an account of the manners and customs of the modern Egyptians, 19th century, this is the 1800s. They used often to be jostled in the streets of Cairo and sometimes beaten merely for passing on the right hand of a Muslim. At present, they scarcely ever dare to utter a word of abuse when reviled or beaten unjustly by the meanest Arab or Turk. For many a Jew has been put to death upon a false and malicious accusation of uttering disrespectful words against the Quran or the Prophet. So if I'm an Egyptian and I have a beef against a particular Jew, I'll simply say he spoke against the Prophet. He spoke against the Quran. It is common to hear an Arab abuse his jaded donkey, and after applying to him various derogatory epithets, end by calling the beast a Jew. That's the 1800s. 1984, source number 7. Sorry for not keeping up over there. There we go. This is a Saudi Arabian delegate to the wonderful United Nations Human Rights Commission, which is anything but that. In December 1984, here Jews have indeed been the victims of discriminations throughout the centuries. But why? Let them answer this question themselves. The Talmud says that any Jew who does not drink every year the blood of a non-Jew, we're back to that. We'll be damned forever, right? So ever the opportunists, these Islamists have adopted the good old, dependable blood libel against the Jews. Remember, we ended off last time by pointing out that if you ever think that was from Achad Ha'am, that was number 10 of the previous section, right? How could the whole world be mistaken? Well, just look at the blood libel. We know, forget about Pesach, any time of year, right? Blood is absolutely forbidden, and this blood libel continues and continues. Lastly, of this section, the Hamas 1988 charter. The Jews were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, they were behind World War I, World War II, through which they made huge financial gains by trading in armaments and paved the way for the establishment of their state. There is no war going on anywhere without having their finger in it. Their plan is embodied in, there we go, the protocols of the elders of Zion. And their present conduct is the best proof of what we are saying. Right? So we have the charter of Hamas, which of course Hamas is somehow the darling of the left. How is Hamas the darling of the radical left? Because they fight against the Jews, and therefore all you need to become the darling is to fight against the Jews. Though I read interesting, let me share that with you very quickly right now, if I can. Very interesting. Did that work? Good, that worked. I don't know if you can read this so well. This is the Daily Alert, DAILY alert.org. Okay? It used to be daily that they would put out an update on all the news affecting Jews, Israel, and now it comes out every Monday and Thursday. It's probably too small for you all to read, but just an interesting thing I saw in this morning's report that I read, and you could subscribe for that, or either go online, dailyalerts.org, or you could subscribe. They'll send it to you as an email whenever it comes out. Interesting, though, polls show Gazans reject Hamas rule. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Credible public opinion polls conducted by the Palestine Center for Public Opinion over the past decade demonstrated that most Gazans have consistently opposed the Hamas policy of firing rockets or incendiary balloons at Israel, as well as the Hamas-sponsored protests at the border fence. The majority of Gazans have typically supported a ceasefire and even open economic relations with Israel. Half or more have also voiced the view that Hamas should drop its calls for the destruction of Israel. Overall, the large majority of Gazans, according to the most recent polls, reject Hamas rule altogether. Interesting. I think I shared with you before that in when was this? Son was born, babies, in the mid to late 1980s. So Israel still controlled the Gaza Strip. And my family and I, myself, Natalie, and then either one child, my oldest son, or we had two children, we would vacation on the Gaza Strip. There was something called Gush Katif. Gush is a block, like this Gush Etzion in the Etzion area of Yehuda Shomron, where there was 4 settlements arranged as a block. So there's also Gush Katif. There was Gush Katif, was where you had these different Jewish settlements there in Gaza, not in Gaza City, but on the Gaza Strip, and that's where they had these wonderful greenhouses that where lettuce was grown, and it was supplying Israel and a good part of Europe. And when Israel left Gaza, the businesses were left for the Palestinians, but instead it was destroyed. But we were there, so there was Natalie was going with some of the other women, girls who were there there was a separate beach, was driving to the beach, and she got stuck. She got stuck in the sand alongside one of the roads, and without a word, there were a bunch of Arab workers who were walking past. They saw she was stuck, right? In a moment, they all walked over, they all lifted the car, put it back on the road, and wished her well, right? Many Gazans were working in Israel and shopping in Israel, and Israelis were shopping in Gaza. And we can get along with the people. We can't get along with, at least at this point, unless they decide to revise somewhat, we can't get along with Hamas. Though on my trip to Israel about 2 years ago, where I met with many of the different Israeli and Palestinian leaders, including Mansour Abbas, who is now joining the government of Naftali Bennett and Lapid, right? So then, right, when you're dealing with, again, even amongst the Islamists, I've mentioned this before, there's the South and the North, and one of them sees coexistence with Israel as a possibility and as a value. So who knows? We'll see what Hashem has in mind. But with Hamas, as it's presently being run, there is not much hope, but there is hopefully hope with the people. Hopefully there is. Okay, so that's the roots going back to Christianity and Islam. And that we understand, because again, they were meant to replace the Jews. So the Jews, right, were supposed to embrace this upgrade. And when we didn't embrace the upgrade, they viewed that as a defiance, as chutzpah, and as undermining their credibility. And therefore, so much hatred ended up pouring out as a result of that. Okay, but we would think enlightenment. Oh, enlightenment, the virtues of mankind in general, of humanity. So that should work wonders for the Jewish people, except it was for all similar to what we see today, I'm sorry to say, with all of these liberal movements and to respect the rights of everyone, yet no one seems to come out when it's all the Jews who marched for the rights of so many others the past year, right? But when it's the Jews who are being attacked, strangely enough, we don't find them marching along with us or standing shoulder to shoulder with us. And that approach already started back with the Enlightenment. All right, let's see, source number 1, right? And right, so even though Enlightenment moved away from this traditional Christianity, the hatred of Jews was firmly embedded in the mind of the Gentiles. And many of the leaders of the Enlightenment were avid anti-Semites, and the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, adopted many of their writings into their propaganda. Voltaire, the single most famous figure of the Enlightenment, on the Jews, they are a totally ignorant nation. For many years have combined contemptible miserliness and the most revolting superstition with a violent hatred of all those nations that have tolerated them. If this isn't projection, right? Violent towards the nations that have tolerated us. Yeah, right. Nevertheless, they should not be burned at the stake because I am an enlightened person. Your priests have always sacrificed human victims with their sacred hands, right? We kill people, but they should not be burned at the stake. What a revolutionary, enlightened approach he had, that we shouldn't be burned at the stake. The Jewish people are forever indebted to his enlightened view. Arthur Hertzberg, source number 2, the French Enlightenment and the Jews, about Voltaire's Jews. He ruled the Jew to be outside society and to be hopelessly alien even to the future age of enlightened man. If we have the enlightenment of mankind, then what do we have to do to the Jews? Make them less than men, less human, and therefore the enlightenment will not include them. I can't pronounce this, but this French individual, number 3, not only did the nation despise the Jew, they even hated them and believed that they were as justified in hating as in despising them. They were hated because they were known to hate other men. Once again, our projection. They were despised because they were seen observing customs which were thought ridiculous. Okay, you could have customs which others think are ridiculous. I'm sure to many, when I'm flying through an airport and I'm putting on my tefillin and my talis and my tefillin, I would try to find a somewhat less busy area, but I'm sure the people who are passing by say, that looks strange. I wonder what that guy is doing. Okay, many people have strange customs, but that's not a reason to have this vicious hatred. Number 4, we're already getting towards Germany. And Paul Henry Dietrich de Halbach, a German baron and philosopher. And this is very interesting, right? When the Jews, at first we were hated for denying Christianity. But as we'll see in the subsequent sections, it's a moving target. It's always a moving target. So over here, now we're being hated in Germany for producing Christianity, right? As he writes, it must in fact be admitted that even while they perished, the Jews had their revenge on the Romans, their conquerors. From the ruins of their country, a fanatic sect emerged, which gradually polluted the whole empire. So now the Jews are being blamed for creating Christianity. Number 6, the Jews are an illiterate, barbarous, and ridiculous people. Isn't that great? That's an Enlightenment view of the Jews. Now, there is a book that became called, we'll see what we're quoting it over here, right? Intellectual. And this became, had a clear influence on Hitler, Yamach Shemo V'Zichro, as we will see over here. Just one second. Yeah. This is again from Prager and Telushkin, the book, Why the Jews, an excellent, excellent, excellent book to read and to have. According to Foundations, this was Houston or Houston Stewart Chamberlain's 1899 book called Foundations of the 19th Century. The future of humanity will be determined by the outcome of the incredible struggle between two races, the Teutonic Aryan and the Jewish Semitic. This clearly was the basis for Nazism. The racial thesis of Foundations notwithstanding, Chamberlain's real opposition was to the Jews' value and theology, not to their race and biology. This fact was repeatedly made clear throughout his 2-volume work. One would expect a racial anti-Semite to hate all Jews, but he painstakingly disassociated himself from such crude anti-Semitism. He denied any personal animus against individuals. In fact, Chamberlain dedicated Foundation 19th Century to a Jew, Julius Wisner, once his professor at the University of Vienna. And this is very common. It's not this Jew who I know, he's a nice guy. It's not that Jew who I know that she's a very nice person. It's the Jews. That's where people just become harebrained and go off the tracks. It was not hatred of the Jews as a race that animated the foremost advocate of racial anti-Semitism. He hated what the Jews stood for and their successes in overturning others' values. I cannot help shuddering at the portentous, irremediable mistake the world made in accepting the traditions of this wretched little nation as the base of its belief. How did the world follow this wretched little nation? He hated the Jews for their monotheism, moral values, which prevented the natural human being from possessing unrestricted freedom. That was this beautiful paganism world where just enjoy power, might. That's what rules. Enjoy. The Jew came into our gay world and spoiled everything with his ominous concept of sin, his law, his cross, right? We might have it later. I'll have to see a quote from Hitler that we defiled the human body with the idea of circumcision. We defiled the human mind with his idea of a conscience, right? And of course, Judaism is all about responsibility. Responsibility to one another, responsibility to God, responsibility for ourselves and our actions. And when we fall short, yes, conscience is a very, very beautiful thing. That's what helps us to correct, to right our path. An uncle through my stepmother was a very brilliant fellow. He was a conservative rabbi, and he once put it very, very well. He said, a conscience is like a square inside a person's heart. And every time we do something wrong, it turns. And the points, they hurt. They hurt as they turn. But the more it turns, those points get worn down until pretty soon you no longer have a square, you have a circle. And as it moves, it's not even felt. I thought that was a very, very brilliant depiction. Yeah. And then section 6, which, as we saw, was based very much on the previous writings. We have Nazi anti-Semitism, right? Which was the culmination of centuries of Christian and European anti-Semitism. When people try to say, it came out of nowhere, it was this scourge, the Nazis that came and went, they had very, very fertile ground on which they could build. And it was centuries of Christian and European anti-Semitism, which created this fertile garden for them to pollute. But they added in a whole new aspect, and that was Jews as a race. And therefore, conversion doesn't help, right? If a person is a certain race, if I'm black, then conversion leaves me black. If I'm Asian, conversion leaves me Asian. And we know certainly from our community how Judaism, what we discussed this before, is not a race and can't be a race. First of all, we accept converts from the entire world. And that gives us the diversity of race. And certainly I mentioned before also that when we had a group coming that Matt Williams brought from the OU that does different data collection for different surveys for the OU. And they commented about our beautiful shul, Beth Jacob, that it is the most diverse, I'm not sure if they said Orthodox or shul in general, the most diverse shul that they have ever been to. And furthermore, as we mentioned earlier, I think it was last week, you also mentioned this, that if Judaism goes by matrilineal descent, then it can't be racial, because you're only getting half of the race to determine the Judaism. But Nazism turned it into a race, and that closed the door on our on those Jews who had converted, on their being spared that. And you have many stories of Jews who had been converted in the cattle cars on the way to the death camps, and some of them insisting on having on having a circumcision right there in the cattle cars, saying, if I'm going to be killed for being a Jew, let me at least die as a Jew. And also was pointed out, I might have mentioned before, that in one of these Nazi propaganda magazines, where they had a picture of the most perfect Aryan baby, right, depicting all that's beautiful about the Aryan, that happened to have been a Jewish girl that they had the picture of. That's just how it's measuring the nose, measuring the chin, just all of this complete lunacy. Right, so there were these fixed traits of character displayed by the Jews, and therefore it was a race, and therefore conversion could not save anybody. Number one, in his new language, the Jew will express the old ideas. His inner nature has not changed. The Jew can speak 1,000 languages, right? Can have assimilated into all these different countries and cultures, he writes, and nevertheless remains a Jew. His traits of character have remained the same. It's always the same Jew, or I should say, it's always the Jew. In his Reichstag speech in 1939, in my life, I have often been a prophet, and today I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the world and thus victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. Right? And from there, we've learned when people say they want to annihilate us, we tend to take them seriously, whether it's the Hamas charter, whether it's the Iran, right? We've learned that we need to take them seriously. Now, all of this cannot, their success in murdering 6 million Jews was only possible because of the assistance of the local populations. And their hatred was not based on Nazi ideology, right, but rather on what they had been fed for centuries. Though there were instances where Jews were saved by the acts of righteous Gentiles. And that really is incredible. I think we all need to ask ourselves honestly, not asking anybody to answer this out loud, but if you had the opportunity to save some innocent neighbors, but knowing that other neighbors, probably if they would find out, would tell the authorities, and that would lead to the death of you, your spouse, and your children, how many would step forward and endanger their own family to save others? So there were many who were saved by the acts of righteous Gentiles. Actually, Pope John Paul II, when he was a young priest, this is a story in the Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust by Yafa Eliach, a true classic that's really an incredible book to have. I read that every Tisha B'Av. I read from there. Truly incredible. Tells a story of a young Christian family who had taken care of the child, actually twins, of friends of theirs, Jews, and had hidden these children, taken care of these children, adopted them as their own. And then, as the war was coming to an end and the parents were no longer alive, they approached this young priest, asking, should they keep the children as part of the Catholic faith? And he asked them, what were the wishes of the parents? And they answered, the wishes of the parents were that if anything happened to them, they should be returned to their people. And he said, this young priest said, then that's what you should do. And this young priest ended up working his way up through and became Pope John Paul II. Source number 3, Shmuel Ettinger, The Modern Period, European Collaboration. The most active accomplices of the Germans in these acts of extermination were the Ukrainians and Lithuanians, but they had many helpers among the Croatians, Romanians, Hungarians, and Slovaks. Their police personnel were willing to search tirelessly for days and even weeks in order to hunt down one concealed Jewish child. But it's not by chance that Poland was chosen as a country of extermination. The Polish people in general did not lift a finger to help the Jews, even the worst days of mass murder or during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. There are many Poles who handed escaping Jews over to the Nazis. Nevertheless, there were some Poles, mainly in the monasteries, who were shocked at the brutal murders, particularly slaughter of young children, and attempted to save them. Through them, several thousand Jewish children were saved in Poland. Though Poland was notorious for anti-Semitism, it is a fact that the number of Jews hidden and saved there by the local population was many times higher than in Soviet Ukraine and Soviet White Russia. Right? During our Poland-Israel trip, so we didn't go to see it, but there is the Poland Holocaust Museum, and there, understandably so, the Polish government makes a big deal that the most righteous Gentiles were in Poland, right? Which is true, but also the most Jews killed, right, was in Poland. So it's very, very complicated. But certainly there was a tremendous amount of accomplices and also many who did help. Actually, a couple of years ago on Tisha B'Av, I showed a film here called The Two Barns. We showed that here in Shul, and it was about some Polish historians who had uncovered how in a number of different towns, the Jews were herded into these barns, locked in there. The barns were doused with things that would burn well, with alcohol, whatever it was, gasoline, and then lit on fire, and they were all burned to death there. And this had created a tremendous uproar in Polish society of those who were aghast about what had happened and those who were furious that this person, this Polish historian, was publicizing this. And actually, the Israeli ambassador to Poland was a person who had been saved by a Polish family, hidden in a barn, and saved. He and his family were saved. So therefore, this documentary came out about, and he was able to help bring the country down from a boiling point by speaking about the two barns. Yes, there were the barns where the Jews were burned to death, and there were also the barns where the Jews were hidden and eventually saved. And our own Irving Gelman and Zichrono Livracha and his wife, she should be well, right, were saved by Gentiles, hidden and saved by Gentiles. So there is these two aspects. And then we get to where we are today. And that is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism is not just history, right? It's current events. And as I said before, the anti-Zionism is simply a very, very thin veil over anti-Semitism, right? After the Holocaust, where being anti-Semitic was taboo, so then it became anti-Zionists. Sad to say that in today's world, it's not quite so taboo anymore to be anti-Semitic and to call it what it really is, anti-Semitism as opposed to anti-Zionism. Amos Kenan in the New Left and the Jews, throwing Jews or Zionists into the sea. Shukari, who's the head of the PLO before Arafat Yimach Shemam, used to say that the Jews should be driven into the sea. After the 67 defeat, that slogan was not so good for the PR. So today, only the Zionists should be thrown into the sea. The only problem is when the Arabs get through pushing all the Zionists into the sea, there won't be any Jews left in Israel. Yaakov Malik, the Soviet ambassador, 1971, the Zionists have come forward with the theory of the chosen people, an absurd ideology. Now, the Zionist movement never discusses the chosen people. The Zionist movement, for the most part, was a secular movement, right? But clearly, anti-Zionism anti-Semitism one and the same. Number three, Jews, whether they presented their religion or whether they've adopted other religions, are known in the U.S. under the collective name as Zionists. And Dr. Robert Moss, we should not be deceived by the use of the term Zionism. The sponsors of this resolution mean by it Jews and Judaism, as well as the state of Israel. Now, when it comes to the left, sometimes they do some self-examination. And this is an interesting read from Ellen Willis. Is there still a Jewish question? Why I am an anti-Zionist. Asking what nerve does the existence of the state of Israel hit? Meaning, why do people get so unhinged, especially those who are so ready to battle for the rights of everyone? And she writes, one second. Along with this one-sided view of the conflict, talking about the conflict in Israel, of course, the left has focused on Israeli acts of domination, human rights violations, with an intense and consistent outrage that it fails to direct toward contempt of comparable or worse abuses elsewhere, certainly toward the unvarnished tyrannies in the Middle East, where, for instance, is the divestment against Saudi Arabia. Right? We asked today, why were people not marching in the streets for all the hundreds of thousands of deaths that took place in Syria recently? But, right, they march and go wild in the streets. Now, I'm not saying it's unreasonable to demand that critics of Israel simultaneously oppose all the violence, misery, despotism in the world, or that complaints against Israel are invalid because Arab regimes are worse. Inevitably, at any given time, some countries, some conflicts will capture people's imagination and indignation more than others. Not because they are worse, but they somehow hit a nerve, became larger than themselves, take on a symbolic dimension. But that is exactly my point. Left animus, hostility toward Israel, is not a simple, self-evident product of the facts. What is the nerve, then, that Israel hits? And she writes, again, 2014, but we could be reading it today, as if it was written today. Underlining the question of the hyperbolic comparisons that animate the anti-Israel belief, right? It's a settler state, apartheid state, divestment, boycott against Israeli academics. The South African regime, of course, was one whose essence was a proudly white racist ideology, local legal segregation, denial of all political rights to the huge majority of people. To see Israel through this grid is to ignore a great many things. Israel was set up by refugees from genocide in Europe and oppression in Arab countries. Palestinian Israelis suffer from discrimination. They are nevertheless citizens who vote, have political parties, participate in the government. That the occupation, while egregious, came about as a result not of aggressive settlement, but of a defensive war. That it continues because of rejectionism on both sides. There's a difference between the nationalists and ultra-Orthodox militants who dream of a greater Israel, and the majority of Israelis who once supported peace but turned to Sharon, right, Ariel Sharon, out of fear and cynicism. As for Israeli academics who they want to boycott, they are independent and disproportionately active in opposing government policy, which leaves the boycott movement with no plausible rationale. Right? The truth is, it's hard for any leftist, even in Israel. And that's why presently, well, first of all, an Arab party is part of the government coalition now. Right? So how that fits in with apartheid is a pretty uneasy fit for those who want to continue to make that ridiculous claim. And, why doesn't Israel just retreat, leave the West Bank, right? Then all will be great. Well, it didn't come out so beautifully in Gaza, nor did it work out so beautifully in southern Lebanon. We had a security zone there. We left, and now Hezbollah is there. We were in Gaza, as I mentioned before. We left, and now Hamas is there. So is there any reason, the definition of lunacy is repeating the same thing and expecting a different result? And especially, this is a situation where our lives, literally our lives depend on it. Even more fantastic is the Nazi comparison, often expressed in metaphors. Israeli soldiers, SS men. I imagine that most parts of this equation, if pressed, would concede that Israel is not a totalitarian dictatorship with a program of world domination, nor has it engaged in the systematic murder of millions of people on the grounds that they are a subhuman race. It was interesting. There was a Muslim cleric, I forget from which country, it's a number of years ago, who came out and said, right, what's all this talk about? Right, the Jews are trying to kill everybody. Right, they're really pretty bad at it. Right, Muslims walk around in Israel, no one's killing them. Right, but then of course he had to retract that, right, because of pressure that was put on him. Why do these tropes have such appeal? Where does it come from? The impulse to go beyond taking Israel to task for its concrete misdeeds, to lump it with the worst, most criminal states in history. That Israel is seen as a Western graft in the Arab Middle East, a view Israelis themselves would contest, given that most of the population comes from the Middle East and North Africa, and a surrogate for American power, contributes to its symbolic importance as a target, as does an unconscious condescendence towards Arab, at least to a double standard of moral expectations for Israel and its neighbors. But it's impossible to not notice how the runaway inflation of Israel's villainy aligns with ingrained cultural fantasies about the iniquity and power of Jews, and how the traditional pariah status of Jews has been replicated by a pariah Jewish state. And the special fury and vitriol that greet any attempt to bring up this subject in left circles further suggests that more is at stake here than an ordinary political dispute, just as more is at stake in the Israel-Palestine clash than an ordinary border dispute. Okay, so she's really, I think, hitting the nail on the head. I'd argue that, just 1 second. I'd argue that no one, Jewish or not, brought up in a Christian or Islamic dominated culture can come to this issue without baggage. Since the patriarchal monotheism that governs our sexually repressive structure of morality, here's the left, and all the ambivalence that goes along with it was invented by Jews. Right? Here we go. Here we have the conscience now. The concept of one transcendent God has a double meaning. It proclaims the subordination of all human authority to a higher reality that codifies as God the Father. That's patriarchal. The Jews in their mythic role as a chosen people destined to achieve the redemption of the world through their adherence to God's laws embody a similar duality. Avatars of spiritual freedom, and then patriarchal authority and control of desire on the other. In relation to Christianity and Islam, the Jews are the authors of morality, but also the stubborn naysayers, setting themselves apart, refusing to embrace Jesus or Muhammad as the fulfillment of their quest. So basically, you have the religions hating the Jews for not accepting their upgrade, and you have the others hating the Jews for imposing religion, the scourge of the spirit known as conscience. So that's how we are sort of stuck in the middle, right? The real genocide in Gaza. Some foreign Hamas supporters try to play down the covenant or seriously say it should be of little concern. True, it has been there for a quarter century from the very founding of Hamas, and no Hamas leader has announced it. And at its heart is a command from the prophet with the very day of judgment at stake and the success of the genocidal mission. But one Jewish defender of Hamas, go figure, told me not long ago, the genocidal imperative should just be regarded as if it were the boilerplate rhetoric. And besides, he said, Hamas is only really concerned with murdering the 5 million Jews of Israel, not all the Jews in the world. I believe he thought I would find this reassuring. But the ignoramuses comparing Israelis to Nazis in Gaza to genocide, while ignoring actual ongoing genocide in Syria, Iraq, must be seen as the excrescence of the enduring double standard to which Israelis and Jews are subjected. I'm sorry, those using slogans like "at genocide in Gaza" have left behind any fig leaf for what seems clear to me is a twisted joy of an excuse for Jew hatred. Hatred now seems clear was never eradicated, just briefly driven underground as the multiplicity of chants death to the Jews, not the Israelis, but the Jews, sweeping Europe makes clear. It suggests that there is in Europe an adamantine anti-Semitism that rises to the surface whenever it is possible to malign Jews, instigate pogroms, beat Jewish passersby, burn synagogues, murder Jewish families. Perhaps more than anything, Gaza gives Europeans a fraudulent but apparently satisfying way of exculpating their entire continent's complicity in Hitler's genocide. The Jews are just bad, just like Nazis. Everyone debates the line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I think the "at genocide in Gaza" analogists have shown us one place it can be found. Those who use it give themselves away. And like I said before, certainly recent events have very clearly stripped away any veil of nothing against the Jews, but anti-Zionists. When people are chased down coast to coast. Dr. Martin Luther King responding to a black student's tirade against Zionism. When people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews. You're talking anti-Semitism. Lastly, the uniqueness of anti-Semitism. And this will lead us into part 2, where we will continue next week, which tries to show the causes. And like I said, it is a real moving target. Gustavo Perednik, an Argentinian-born Israeli author and educator with an expertise in anti-Semitism, has identified several characteristics that, when taken together, classify hatred of Jews as unique among other instances of hatred throughout history. Number one, he says, longevity. It is the longest hatred in history. Ever since the time of Abraham, as we began this class last week, going back to biblical times, we can identify the presence of anti-Semitism. Universality has been experienced everywhere Jews have lived in history, nearly without exception. Remember years and years ago, we had a Rabbi Tukeya who came and spoke in Shul. He was the chief rabbi in Japan. And he shared with us an incredible story that took place during World War II, right? Japan was part, as we know, Pearl Harbor, part of the Axis, along with Germany and Italy. And yet many Jews, the whole Mir Yeshiva on its way to Shanghai was passing through Japan. So many Jews were in Japan. And the Nazis were bothered. You're our ally. What are you doing over here? So they came to the Japanese authorities to have them start to round up and murder the Jews. And some of the heads, I forget the names he said, of the Japanese government military called in two of the leading rabbis there in Japan, and said to them, everyone hates the Jews. Why should we save the Jews? Why should we help the Jews? And one of them did not know what to say. The other one answered, you know why they hate us? They hate the Jews because we're Asian. You're Asian? What do you mean you're Asian? You're not Asian, we're Asian. And he said, tell me, when they speak about the Jews and the yellows, who's the yellows? Right? We're not yellow. Who are the yellows? They're talking about you. So right now, we're first on their list. And when they finish with us, who's going to be next? How Aryan are you? Blonde hair, blue eyes, 6 feet tall? You guys are next. And those are the words that helped to sway that decision and where it was heading. Universality, experienced everywhere Jews have lived in history, nearly without exception. Permanent. It's embedded in the collective cultural consciousness of communities and peoples, even long after the Jews have left and been expelled from their land. Right? How many Jews are left in these Arab countries? How many Jews were left in some of these European countries after World War II? Yet it was permanent. Intensity, ongoing hate, persecution, exile, violence, and genocide more than any other hatred in history. Like I said before, who's getting riled up about the terrible things happening in Syria or Iraq or anywhere else on the planet? Right? The Muslims in China, right? But where do people become this intense and roll into the streets and try to hunt down members? That's intensity. Fantasy. Hate against any minority group usually develops out of a misinterpretation of reality. The case of anti-Semitism, there is no misinterpretation. Sheer fantasy, right? The blood libel we keep bringing up. Not that long ago, there was a politician, a local politician in history, in Washington, who was caught in bad traffic because of bad weather. And he was blaming who? The Rothschilds. It's the Rothschilds who control the weather, which offsets the traffic. I mean, we're talking about beyond fantasy. We're talking about so ludicrous that it boggles the mind. But here was a local politician in Washington who was sure that the bad weather was caused by the Jews, the Rothschilds. They control it. Irrationality. Michael Curtis, distinguished professor at Rutgers, everything and its opposite is an excuse to hate the Jews. And this is unique to anti-Semitism, right? And he writes, and this we'll explore starting next week, right? They are, right? We're capitalists, we're communists, right? We're aggressors, we're pacifists. We're too religious, we're too modern, too liberal, right? We follow the moral laws, we're morally decadent, right? We're arrogant, we're timid, you name it, right? We killed Jesus, we brought Christianity to the world. It's this moving target. He writes, everything and its opposite becomes an excuse for anti-Semitism. So therefore, we do need to ask the cause, because its cause has to be unique if it has all of these aspects. And proposed theories is what we will explore next week. And once again, I give a thanks to the Morashah syllabus for providing me with these sources that Morashah, not from the school Morashah that was here in California for a while, but it's a different organization. My friends, it's a difficult topic, but I think it's important that we take this deep dive into it. I wish everybody a Chodesh Tov. Today and tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Tammuz, right? Today's a yahrzeit for my sister, so let the learning be Le'ilei Nishmas Devorah Pesel Bas Asher Chayim. All are welcome to join us tomorrow night, 6:15, in person, those who can. Otherwise, online, we'll have Kabbalat Shabbat until the point of the end of L'cha Dodi, when we're actually Makabel Shabbos, except Shabbos. And Saturday night, we'll have to stop it pretty soon with the start of the 3 weeks. We'll have another couple of weeks of guitar accompanied Havdalah. That will be at 9 o'clock again this week. Those who can join, please do. Good seeing everybody. We're having meetings with our medical advisory committee, and hopefully pretty soon we will be taking some steps forward on moving forward and opening up in a measured, safe manner. But thank God, the vaccines have proven to be incredibly successful. The rates are down, and we should be able to move forward accordingly. David, yes.
Yes, Rabbi, just one thing. There was a group of community leaders, and Rabbi Yisroel Kalish was the rabbi's name, who went to see the Japanese military. And I just didn't want his name to get lost in history. It's Yisroel Kalish. He was the head of the Mir Yeshiva.
Okay.
And he was the one who brought up that comment.
Okay. I thank you for that, for filling that in for me, because I figure I did not recall. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, my dear friends, everybody have a good day, a good Shabbos, a good Chodesh. I look forward to seeing everybody soon.